After countless failed attempts to have a child, a father's world felt complete as he held his newborn daughter for the first time in the hospital, believing his family was finally whole. However, the father would soon uncover the shocking truth behind this birth. When he picked up a newspaper, the front page caught his attention, and what he discovered forced him to call 911 immediately. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like these stories, don't forget to subscribe. Andrew Collins stepped off the plane, his body weary from the long flight but his spirit buoyed by the anticipation of seeing his family again after 6 months away. As he made his way through the bustling airport, pulling his luggage behind him, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Ronnie, his personal driver, holding a sign with his name. "Welcome back, Mr. Collins," Ronnie greeted him warmly as Andrew approached. "I hope you had a pleasant flight." "Thanks, Ronnie, it's good to be back," Andrew replied with a tired smile. As they walked to the car, Andrew's mind raced with thoughts of his family. He hadn't seen his wife Amelia or his mother Lucia in half a year, and now there was a new addition to greet, his newborn baby. The anticipation of meeting his child for the first time filled him with nervous energy. Once settled in the back seat of the sleek black sedan, Andrew turned to Ronnie. "How are Amelia and my mother? Are they at the hospital now?" Ronnie nodded as he merged into traffic. "Yes, sir, I drove them there earlier this morning. Everything seemed to be going smoothly." Andrew let out a contented sigh. "It feels incredible to be back. I can't wait to see them all, especially the baby. Has anything else new happened while I was gone, Ronnie?" The driver paused for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Nothing much beyond the usual, sir. Just been driving your wife and mother to checkups or to the pharmacy chain your mother manages." Andrew nodded, not noticing Ronnie's momentary hesitation. He pulled out his phone, eager to let his family know he had arrived. He tried Amelia first, but there was no answer. Next, he dialed his mother. "Andrew, darling," Lucia Collins' voice rang out warmly. "You've landed safely then?" "Just now, Mom. I'm on my way to the hospital to meet you all." He could hear the joy in her voice. "Oh, we can't wait to see you," Lucia exclaimed. "Just wait until you see your newborn baby. She's absolutely lovely." After ending the call, Andrew settled back for the rest of the drive, pulling out his laptop to catch up on some work. The car fell into a comfortable silence as they made their way through the city streets towards the hospital. Upon arrival, Andrew approached the nurse's station, inquiring about his wife's room. The nurse tapped away at her computer for a moment before looking up with a smile. "Amelia Collins is in the maternity wing, room 835 on level 8. Andrew thanked her and made his way to the 8th floor. As he approached room 835, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to calm his excitement. Then he pushed open the door. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. The room was far more luxurious than he had expected, but his eyes were immediately drawn to Amelia, sitting up in bed and cradling a tiny bundle. His mother, Lucia, bustled about the room, tidying up a hospital bag and fussing with a baby car seat. "Andrew," Amelia's face lit up as she saw him. "You're here." He crossed the room in a few quick strides, embracing his wife carefully, mindful of the precious cargo in her arms. "I'm so sorry I missed the birth," he murmured, kissing her forehead. "Don't worry about that," Lucia chimed in, coming over to hug her son. "The little one decided to make her appearance a month early. There was no way you could have known." Andrew gazed down at the infant in Amelia's arms, marveling at how tiny she was. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "What's her name?" "Louisa," Amelia replied softly. "Louisa Collins." "It's perfect," Andrew said, gently stroking the baby's cheek. He noticed she was drinking from a cup feeder rather than nursing. "Is everything all right? Why isn't she breastfeeding?" Amelia's face fell slightly. "My milk hasn't come in yet. The hospital is providing donor milk for now." "Don't worry about that," Andrew reassured her quickly. "The important thing is that she's healthy and you're both doing well." Just then the door opened, and Sarah, Andrew's sister and a nurse at the hospital, entered carrying a tray of food. Her face broke into a wide smile when she saw Andrew. "Big brother, you made it!" They embraced warmly, and Andrew thanked her profusely for taking care of Amelia and the baby. Sarah waved off his thanks. "Of course, I know how long you two have been trying for this. Who would have thought after that infertility diagnosis you'd be standing here a father?" As the family shared this joyous moment together, Andrew felt a sense of completeness wash over him. Despite the long absence and the unexpected early arrival, he was here now, ready to embrace his role as a father and support his growing family. The soft beeping of medical equipment and the hushed voices of hospital staff created a soothing backdrop as Andrew helped Amelia to her feet. The new mother winced slightly, still sore from the delivery, but her eyes shone with a mix of exhaustion and joy as she gazed at their newborn daughter, Louisa, nestled securely in her car seat. Andrew's mother, Lucia, bustled around the room, her elegant hands efficiently packing away the last of Amelia's belongings into a designer hospital bag. The room, more luxurious than Andrew had expected, was bathed in the warm glow of afternoon sunlight filtering through the half-drawn curtains. "Are you sure you're ready to go, darling?" Lucia asked, her voice laced with concern as she zipped up the bag. "There's no rush if you need more time to rest." Amelia shook her head, her fingers gently stroking Louisa's cheek. "No, I'm ready to go home. I want to start our life together as a family." Lucia beamed at her daughter-in-law. "You've been so strong, Amelia. Through the birth and even now, I'm proud of you." Sarah, ever the efficient nurse, opened the door and ushered them out. "Before you go, you'll need to stop by the administration desk," she explained. "They'll have you complete the payment and give you the certificate of live birth, along with Amelia's prescribed medication." As they made their way out of the room, Andrew couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude towards his sister. "Thank you for everything, Sarah," he said, giving her a one-armed hug as he balanced Louisa's car seat in the other. "We couldn't have asked for better care." Sarah's smile was genuine, but Andrew noticed a flicker of something. Was it unease in her eyes? Before he could dwell on it, they were moving through the corridors towards the administration desk. The hospital buzzed with activity around them, nurses hurrying past with charts, visitors clutching bouquets of flowers, the occasional cry of a newborn echoing from a nearby room. Andrew felt as if he were in a bubble of joy, insulated from the world's troubles by the miracle of his new daughter. At the administration desk, Sarah spoke to the nurse behind the counter. "Could you please provide the Collins family with their birth documents, postpartum care instructions, and prescriptions?" As Andrew completed the payment, a commotion from down the corridor caught his attention. A disheveled woman was frantically pushing past doctors and medical staff, her eyes wild and unfocused. "My baby," she was muttering, her voice a mix of desperation and confusion. To Andrew's surprise, she pointed directly at their group. Sarah quickly stepped in front of Andrew and Amelia, her voice low and reassuring. "Don't worry about her. It's probably just a homeless person who was sleeping here. The hospital sometimes has to remove them. I'll handle this with the other staff. You all should go home and get settled." Amelia tugged on Andrew's hand, her voice tinged with anxiety. "Let's go home, Andrew. I want to get Louisa settled." Andrew hesitated for a moment, his eyes still on the distraught woman. There was something about her desperation that tugged at him, a nagging feeling he couldn't quite place. But Amelia's insistence and the weight of Louisa's car seat in his hand pulled him back to the present moment. "Of course, let's go," he agreed, tearing his gaze away from the scene. As they made their way to the exit, Andrew couldn't shake the image of the woman's face, the raw pain and confusion in her eyes. He glanced back one last time as they pushed through the hospital doors, catching a glimpse of Sarah speaking urgently with a security guard. Outside, the late afternoon sun was warm on their faces, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of nearby flowering trees. Ronnie, their driver, was waiting with the car, his face breaking into a wide smile as he saw them approach. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Collins," Ronnie said warmly as he adjusted the car seat in the back row, "and hello to the newest member of the family, little Miss—" "Louisa," Amelia answered brightly, her smile radiant. As they settled into the car, Andrew couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. overwhelming joy at bringing his daughter home, lingering concern about the strange incident in the hospital, and a deep, unshakable love for his new family. As Ronnie pulled away from the curb, Andrew reached over to squeeze Amelia's hand, pushing away the nagging doubts and focusing on the beautiful future that lay ahead of them. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city as Ronnie maneuvered the car through the bustling streets. Andrew sat in the back, his body weary from the long flight and the emotional whirlwind of meeting his newborn daughter. The events at the hospital still played on his mind, the joy of holding Louisa, the strange incident with the homeless woman, and the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. As they drove, Andrew's stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since his morning flight. He leaned forward, catching Ronnie's eye in the rearview mirror. "Ronnie, I hate to ask, but is there any chance we could make a quick stop? I'm famished." Lucia, who had been gazing out the window, lost in thought, turned to her son with concern. "Oh, darling, we should have thought of that. There's a lovely little diner just a few blocks from here. We could stop and get you a proper meal." Andrew glanced at the car seat where Louisa slept peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No, that's all right, Mum. I don't want to delay getting Louisa home. She's so small, and I'd rather not expose her to a crowded diner just yet." Amelia reached out and squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and something Andrew couldn't quite place. Was it anxiety? "You're already such a thoughtful father," she said softly. Andrew turned to Ronnie. "Could you find us a gas station or convenience store? I'll just grab something quick to eat in the car." Ronnie nodded, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "Of course, Mr. Collins, there's one about a mile up the road." As they pulled into the gas station, the fluorescent lights flickered to life in the growing dusk. Andrew stepped out of the car, stretching his legs. "I'll be right back," he said, leaning down to speak through the open window. "Does anyone need anything?" Amelia bit her lip, hesitating for a moment before speaking. Could you pick up a can of formula? I'm worried about my breast milk not coming in yet." Andrew nodded, trying to hide his surprise, not wanting to add to Amelia's stress. "Of course, honey, I'll get it." The bell above the door chimed as Andrew entered the store. The harsh lighting and the hum of the refrigerators created a stark contrast to the warm, dim interior of the car. He made his way to the counter, ordering a coffee and a hot dog from the bored-looking attendant. While waiting for his order, Andrew wandered the aisles, his eyes scanning the shelves absently. When he reached the baby care section, he paused, the reality of his new role as a father hitting him anew. He picked up a can of formula, turning it over in his hands as he read the label. Suddenly a memory flashed in his mind. The prescription from the hospital. In all the commotion with the homeless woman, they had forgotten to pick up Amelia's medication. Andrew cursed under his breath, feeling a pang of guilt for his oversight. Grabbing his order from the counter, he hurried back to the car. As he climbed in, he turned to Amelia, his face apologetic. "Honey, I'm so sorry, we forgot to pick up your prescription at the hospital." Amelia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something fear, passing across her face before she composed herself. "Oh, right. The prescription." Lucia leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "What medication is it, dear? We might have it at one of our own pharmacy branches." Andrew pulled out the crumpled prescription from his pocket, squinting to read it in the dim light of the car. He read out the list of medications, watching as Lucia nodded along. "We have most of these," Lucia said after a moment's consideration. "But that antibiotic, it's specifically for breastfeeding women, isn't it? We don't stock that one." Andrew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, we can't substitute it. We'll have to go back to the hospital." A heavy silence fell over the car. Amelia stared out the window, her reflection in the glass unreadable. Lucia patted Andrew's knee reassuringly. "It's all right, dear. Better to get it now than to worry about it later." Ronnie cleared his throat softly. "Shall I turn us around, Mr. Collins?" Andrew nodded, his eyes drifting to Louisa, still sleeping peacefully in her car seat. "Yes, please, Ronnie. Let's get this sorted out so we can finally get home." Andrew couldn't help but feel a twinge of frustration at the delay, but he knew Amelia's health was paramount. As the car made a U-turn, heading back towards the hospital, Andrew's mind drifted back to the strange incident with the distraught woman at the hospital foyer. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on getting Amelia's medication and finally getting his new family settled at home. The car pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, the building's imposing facade now bathed in the soft glow of morning lights. Andrew turned to his family, noting the tension that seemed to have settled over them during the drive back. "I'll go in and get the medication," he said, his hand already on the door handle. "There's no need for all of us to go through the hassle." Lucia leaned forward, her face etched with concern. "Are you sure, dear? I could handle it for you. You must be exhausted from your trip." Andrew shook his head, offering a tired smile. "It's all right, Mom. I'll be quick." As he stepped out of the car, the cool morning air hit him, a stark contrast to the warmth inside. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his head. The events of the day swirled in his mind like a confusing kaleidoscope. Just as he was about to enter the hospital, movement at the far end of the drop-off area caught his eye. A police car was parked there, its lights off, but unmistakable. Andrew's heart rate quickened as he recognized the disheveled figure speaking to two officers. It was the same homeless woman from earlier. The woman seemed calmer now, more composed, though her face still bore the marks of recent distress. As Andrew watched, she suddenly turned, her eyes locking onto him. She pointed, saying something to the officers that he couldn't hear at this distance. A chill ran down Andrew's spine. He was about to turn away when Amelia's voice called out from the car. The window rolled down. "Andrew, what are you doing just standing there? Hurry in, please!" Shaking off his unease, Andrew nodded and pushed through the hospital doors. As they closed behind him, he glanced back just in time to see the homeless woman being ushered into the police car. A mixture of relief and curiosity washed over him. Had they arrested her? But for what? And why did she point at him? Inside, the hospital's atmosphere had changed from the hectic commotion from before to a more subdued morning rhythm. Andrew made his way to the pharmacy section, the squeak of his shoes on the polished floor echoing in the quiet corridors. At the pharmacy counter, a tired-looking nurse greeted him. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" Andrew handed over the prescription. "I need to fill this, please. It's for my wife. She just gave birth." The nurse's eyes scanned the prescription, then looked up at Andrew apologetically. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's quite a queue for prescriptions at the moment. It might take an hour, maybe more." Andrew's heart sank. He glanced at his watch, thinking of Amelia and Louisa waiting in the car. "Is there any way to expedite it? We have a newborn baby with us." The nurse's expression softened slightly. "I understand, sir. I'll see what I can do to move it along, but I can't promise anything." Nodding his thanks, Andrew stepped away from the counter. He pulled out his phone, dialing Lucia's number. "Mom, it's going to be a while for the prescription. At least an hour, they said." He could hear Amelia's worried voice in the background as Lucia replied, "An hour? Oh dear." "Look," Andrew said, running a hand through his hair, "why don't you all go home, get Louisa settled? I'll wait here and take a taxi when it's done." There was a moment of hesitation on the other end of the line before Lucia agreed. "If you're sure, dear, we'll see you at home then." As he ended the call, Andrew felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, from hours of flight to all the excitement of the day. He decided to walk around, his feet carrying him almost unconsciously towards the maternity wing. As he rounded a corner, he suddenly caught sight of a familiar figure, his sister Sarah, deep in conversation with a doctor in a quiet room. Their voices were muffled, but Andrew could catch snippets of their exchange. "Thank you," Sarah was saying, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not easy. For my brother." The doctor replied, his tone reassuring, "We're in this together." And they pulled into a tight embrace. Andrew quickly stepped back, feeling like an intruder. His mind raced. What was Sarah talking about? What did she mean about him? Before he could ponder further, his phone buzzed, a notification from the pharmacy that his prescription would be ready soon. As he made his way back, he overheard a group of visitors talking animatedly. "Can you believe that homeless woman earlier?" one said. "Why do they let them sleep in public hospitals?" Another replied, "She seemed so desperate about her baby. Do you think she was a patient?" Andrew quickened his pace, uncomfortable with the gossip. He collected the medication from the pharmacy and headed towards the exit, his phone ringing as he walked. It was Amelia. "Andrew, are you still at the hospital?" Her voice sounded strained, almost panicked. "We just reached home, but the baby won't stop crying. Your mother is cooking downstairs, and I'm alone in the nursery. I need help, Andrew." "I'm on my way," Andrew assured her, feeling a pang of guilt. "I promise I won't make any more stops. I'll be there as soon as I can." As he stepped outside, Andrew noticed the police car from earlier was gone. He hailed a taxi, giving the driver his address. As they pulled away from the hospital, Andrew thought about the strange incidents, the homeless woman and the overheard conversations. It all swirled in his mind, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. The morning light streamed through the window, blinding Andrew as the taxi sped along. A sense of worry settled over him as he thought about what might await him at home on the first day taking care of a newborn baby. This day, which should have been a celebration of his daughter's arrival, had turned into a tangled web of exhaustion and unease. The taxi pulled up to Andrew's home, a stately house that spoke of the Collins family's success in the pharmaceutical industry. As Andrew paid the fare and stepped out, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Finally, he could focus on his family without any more interruptions. He approached the front door quietly, not wanting to disturb Louisa if she had finally fallen asleep, his footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. Just as he was about to enter, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. Muffled voices drifted through the partially open window, catching his attention. He overheard hushed voices. His mother and Amelia were deep in conversation. "Homeless woman," his mother's voice, usually so composed, now tinged with anxiety. Amelia's reply was barely audible. "Shouldn't have trusted her." "Find her and pay her more," Lucia concluded, her tone urgent. Andrew's breath caught in his throat. He stood frozen, straining to hear more, but the conversation had already moved on. Taking a deep breath to compose himself, he pushed open the door, the familiar creak seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet house. As he stepped into the foyer, the voices abruptly ceased. He made his way to the dining room, where he found Amelia and Lucia seated at the table, their faces a mask of forced casualness. "Andrew," Amelia said, her voice a little too bright, "you're back. Did you get the medication?" Andrew nodded slowly, studying their faces. "Yes, I did. What were you two discussing just now? I thought I heard something about a homeless woman. Everyone is talking about her." Amelia and Lucia exchanged a quick glance before Lucia spoke up, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "Oh, we were just talking about that dreadful incident at the hospital. It's really a shame how they let people like that sleep there. They should make her pay a fine or something." Andrew frowned, perplexed by their apparent fixation on the woman. "Why is everyone so focused on her? It seems like that's all I've been hearing about since we left the hospital." Lucia jumped in, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "It's a serious issue, Andrew. The government needs to handle the homeless problem better. Having them sleep in sterile hospital environments is dangerous. They could contaminate the facilities." Amelia stood up, moving towards Andrew. "It's nothing, really, just idle gossip. How about we go check on Louisa? She's been fussy." Sensing the tension in the room, Andrew decided not to pursue the topic further. He walked over to Amelia, massaging her shoulders gently. "How's the baby?" he asked, changing the subject. Amelia leaned into his touch. "She's sleeping in the nursery. I'm still stressed about my breast milk not coming in. I might have to use the formula when she wakes up." Andrew nodded. He handed her the medication and supplements he'd picked up. "The pharmacist said this antibiotic is for healing from the episiotomy, and the supplement should help with milk production and prevent clogging," he explained. As he handed over the pills, Andrew noticed Amelia's hands trembling slightly. She took the medication with a murmured thanks and quickly turned towards the nursery. As the afternoon progressed, Andrew found himself feeling somewhat like an outsider from the flurry of activity in his own home, as Lucia and Amelia bustled around, tending to Louisa's needs. He was grateful for his mother's help, and touched by how well Amelia had bonded with her and seemed to have taken to motherhood, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing out on caring for his own daughter. When Louisa woke up for her feeding, Andrew eagerly volunteered to give her the bottle. As he cradled her in his arms, watching her tiny face as she drank, he felt a surge of love and protectiveness. But all too soon she was asleep again, and Amelia was whisking her back to the nursery, insisting that he must be tired from his long journey. "You should rest, Andrew. There will be plenty of time for bonding tomorrow." As evening fell and the household settled into a quieter rhythm, Andrew found himself alone in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The events of the day played on a loop in his mind: the joy of meeting Louisa, the strange incident at the hospital, the overheard conversations, and the palpable tension in the house. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the photos he had taken at the hospital. Louisa's tiny face looked back at him, peaceful in sleep. As he stared at the image, a nagging thought began to form in the back of his mind. Something about the baby's features doesn't seem right. Shaking his head to clear the unsettling thoughts, Andrew drained his glass and headed upstairs. As he passed the nursery, he paused, listening to the soft sounds of Louisa's breathing. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him that night, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer and suspicions he didn't want to acknowledge. The first light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the curtains when Andrew awoke, his sleep having been fitful and filled with unsettling dreams. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the quiet house before the soft sound of a baby's cry spurred him into action. Pulling on his robe, Andrew made his way down the hallway towards the nursery. As he approached, he could hear Amelia's soothing voice and his mother's gentle humming. He paused at the doorway, taking in the scene before him. Amelia was cradling Louisa, her face a mixture of love and what Andrew now recognized as barely concealed anxiety. Lucia bustled around the room preparing a bottle of formula. The morning light cast a soft glow over the scene, but to Andrew it felt oddly staged, like a perfect picture with something just slightly off. "Good morning," he said softly, stepping into the room. "How's our little one doing?" Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes widening slightly before she composed herself. "Oh, Andrew, you startled me. Louisa's just a bit fussy this morning. Nothing to worry about." Lucia turned from the changing table, a bright smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well? I was just about to take Louisa out for her morning sunbath. The pediatrician said it's good for newborns, you know." Andrew nodded, moving closer to get a better look at his daughter. "I thought I might take the day off, spend some time with you all, get to know Louisa better." A flicker of something, panic, crossed Amelia's face before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh, that's sweet of you, Andrew, but there's no need. We've got everything under control here. If you're needed at work, you should go. We wouldn't want you to fall behind after your long trip." Before Andrew could respond, Lucia was already ushering Amelia and the baby towards the door. Yes, we'll be fine. Why don't you go have some breakfast, dear? I left some coffee and toast in the kitchen." Feeling oddly dismissed, Andrew made his way downstairs. As he entered the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee filled his senses. He poured himself a cup and grabbed a piece of toast, settling at the dining table. His eyes fell on the medication he had picked up the previous night, still sitting untouched on the counter. Frowning, Andrew picked up the pill bottles. Why hadn't Amelia taken her medication? She had been so worried about her milk supply yesterday. As he contemplated this, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. It was David Harris, his trusted business partner. "Andrew, we need you at the office immediately." David's voice was tense, urgent. "There's a situation with one of our international suppliers. A shipment of medications has been flagged at customs due to incorrect labeling. We're looking at potential regulatory fines and significant reputational damage." Andrew's mind raced, remembering the news he had seen a few days ago about pharmaceutical investigations. "How bad is it, David?" "Bad enough that we need you here to review some paperwork and approve a course of action. Your presence is crucial for damage control." Sighing heavily, Andrew agreed to come in. He quickly made his way back upstairs, finding Amelia and Lucia in the backyard gazebo. Louisa lay in a bassinet, her tiny body basking in the gentle morning sun. "I'm sorry, but I have to go to the office," Andrew explained, noting the look of relief that briefly crossed both women's faces. "There's an urgent situation that needs my attention." Amelia nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. "Of course, we understand. Don't worry about us, we'll be fine." As Andrew turned to leave, a thought struck him. "Amelia, don't forget to take your medication. It's still on the kitchen counter." For a moment, Amelia looked confused, then flustered. "Oh, right. Thank you for reminding me. I'll take it right away." Andrew headed back inside, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. As he changed into a suit, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The medication, the strange behavior, the overheard conversations. It all added up to a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. As he stepped outside, he found Ronnie already waiting by the car. The familiar routine of heading to work felt surreal after the events of the past day. As they pulled away from the house, Andrew glanced back, catching a glimpse of Amelia and Lucia still in the gazebo. The perfect picture of maternal care, yet something about it made his stomach churn with unease. The city streets blurred past as Ronnie drove, but Andrew barely noticed. His mind was torn between the impending crisis at work and the growing suspicion that his home life was not what it seemed. As the Collins Farmer building came into view, Andrew steeled himself for what lay ahead, knowing that the challenges he faced at the office might pale in comparison to the truths waiting to be uncovered at home. The Collins Farmer building loomed before Andrew, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. As he stepped out of the car, the familiar bustle of the city enveloped him. The honking of horns, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren. For a moment it all felt surreal, as if he were stepping into a different world from the one he'd left at home. "I'll be here when you need me, Mr. Collins," Ronnie called out as Andrew made his way to the entrance. Andrew nodded absently, his mind already racing with the impending crisis. The lobby was a flurry of activity, more so than usual for this hour. As he made his way to the elevator, he could feel the tension in the air, see it in the worried glances and hushed conversations of his employees. The elevator ride to the top floor seemed to take an eternity. When the doors finally opened, Andrew was immediately met by David, his face etched with concern. "Thank God you're here," David said, falling into step beside Andrew as they walked briskly towards the conference room. "The situation is worse than we initially thought." Inside the conference room, a group of anxious-looking executives and lawyers were gathered around a large table strewn with documents. The room fell silent as Andrew entered, all eyes turning to him expectantly. David quickly brought Andrew up to speed. "The regulatory agency has uncovered discrepancies in our supply chain documents. We're not just looking at fines anymore, Andrew. There's talk of license revocation." Andrew's heart sank as he scanned the documents David handed him. The potential consequences were staggering, not just for the company, but for the thousands of people who relied on their medications. "We need to approve a course of action immediately," David urged. "Every minute counts." Andrew nodded, taking a seat at the head of the table. As the meeting began in earnest, he tried to focus on the crisis at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to the strange events at home, the untouched medication, Amelia's odd behavior, the whispered conversations. "Andrew," David's voice cut through his thoughts, "what do you think? Should we proceed with this plan?" Andrew blinked, realizing he had lost track of the conversation. I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Andrew struggled to regain his focus. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. Andrew told himself it was just nerves clouding his judgment. He signed the documents authorizing immediate action and handed them back to David. "I need a moment," Andrew said abruptly, standing up. "Just give me 5 minutes." He strode out of the conference room, ignoring the confused looks from his colleagues. His feet carried him to the office lounge where he hoped to clear his head with a strong cup of coffee. As he entered the lounge, his eyes fell on a stack of newspapers on the counter. Absently, he picked one up, flipping through the pages as he waited for his coffee. Suddenly, a photo on one of the pages caught his eye, making his blood run cold. It was a picture of a missing baby, wrapped in a pink blanket with a small floral headband. At first glance, it could have been any newborn, but as Andrew stared at the image, a chilling realization dawned on him. The baby in the photo had the same distinctive birthmark near her left temple as Louisa. His hands trembling, Andrew read the headline, "Missing Newborn, Mother Desperately Searching for Baby Girl." The article detailed how a homeless woman, Clara Mitchell, had reported her newborn missing after being discharged from the hospital. Andrew's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle suddenly falling into place. The homeless woman at the hospital, the overheard conversations, Amelia's strange behavior, the untouched medication. In a daze, he pulled out his phone, searching for the picture he'd taken of Louisa at the hospital. His heart pounded as he confirmed that the floral headband and pink blanket were identical to what Amelia had dressed their baby in. The room seemed to spin around him as the horrifying truth became clear. His family, the people he trusted most in the world, had done the unthinkable. With shaking hands, Andrew dialed 911. "I need to report a kidnapping," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think my wife and mother have stolen a baby." As he ended the call, Andrew leaned heavily against the counter, the weight of his discovery threatening to overwhelm him. The crisis at work, which had seemed so urgent just moments ago, now paled in comparison to the personal nightmare unfolding before him. He knew that in making this call, he had set in motion events that would irrevocably change his life and the lives of those he loved. But as he thought of Clara Mitchell and her missing child, he knew he had no choice. The truth, no matter how painful, had to come out. Taking a deep breath, Andrew straightened up, steeling himself for what was to come. He had one more call to make, to Child Protective Services, before he could face his colleagues and the crisis that still loomed over his company. As he dialed the number, he realized that this day would mark the end of life as he knew it, and the beginning of a journey into an uncertain and tumultuous future. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Andrew made his way out of the Collins Farmer building. The bustling city streets, normally a source of energy and purpose, now felt alien and overwhelming. He barely registered the concerned looks from his colleagues as he rushed past them, his mind consumed by the weight of his recent discovery. As he stepped outside, the bright sunlight felt harsh and accusing. Andrew squinted, scanning the street for Ronnie and the car. He spotted them a short distance away and hurried over, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mr. Collins?" Ronnie's voice was laced with concern as Andrew approached. "Is everything all right? You look pale." Andrew met Ronnie's gaze, suddenly realizing that his driver might hold crucial information. "Ronnie, I need you to be completely honest with me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Did you know anything about the baby? Anything unusual happening at home while I was away?" Ronnie's eyes widened and he glanced around nervously before responding. "Mr. Collins, I'm not sure what you mean." "The police are involved now, Ronnie," Andrew pressed, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "If you know something, you need to tell me now." The color drained from Ronnie's face as he realized the gravity of the situation. He took a deep breath before speaking. I didn't know everything, sir, but I did drive Mrs. Collins and your mother to meet a homeless woman several times." Andrew felt his stomach drop as Ronnie continued. "Yesterday morning, before we went to the hospital, we picked her up from her usual spot. She was in labor. We rushed her to the hospital, but through a side entrance. Your sister, Nurse Sarah, was waiting with a doctor." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with sickening clarity. Andrew leaned against the car for support, feeling lightheaded. "Why didn't you tell me earlier, Ronnie?" But before he let the driver answer his question, Andrew already came up with another question. "Did you think Amelia was really pregnant?" Ronnie hesitated, his discomfort evident. "She looked pregnant, sir, but it was odd. I thought maybe it was just because it was her first pregnancy. I didn't realize until yesterday. Your mother told me to keep quiet. I was afraid of losing my job." Andrew closed his eyes, trying to process this new information. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined, involving not just Amelia and his mother, but his sister as well. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. For a moment, Andrew considered the possibility of covering it all up. He could make the problem go away, ensure the homeless woman was taken care of financially, and keep his family intact. The temptation to preserve the life he knew, to protect his loved ones from the consequences of their actions, was almost overwhelming. But as quickly as the thought came, he dismissed it. The image of Clara Mitchell, desperate and searching for her baby, flashed in his mind. The innocent child, taken from her mother's arms, deserved better. And Andrew knew he couldn't live with himself if he allowed this deception to continue. As they pulled up to the house, Andrew saw the police cars already waiting. His heart raced as he stepped out of the car, the finality of his decision hitting him full force. There was no turning back now. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. No matter the personal cost, he was determined to uncover the truth and ensure the baby's safety. With a heavy heart but resolute mind, he approached the officers, ready to face the consequences of his family's actions. The familiar facade of his home, once a symbol of comfort and security, now loomed before him like an ominous fortress. As he led the officers towards the front door, Andrew couldn't help but feel like he was walking into a battle, one that would forever change the course of his life and the lives of those he loved. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the doorknob. The sound of Louisa's cry drifted from inside, a poignant reminder of the innocent life caught in the middle of this tangled web of deceit. With one last steadying breath, Andrew opened the door, stepping into the unknown future that awaited him. The door swung open, and Andrew stepped into the foyer, the police officers close behind him. The familiar scent of home, a mixture of lavender air freshener and the faint aroma of coffee, now seemed cloying and oppressive. The house was eerily quiet, save for the muffled sounds of Louisa's cries coming from upstairs. "This way," Andrew said, his voice barely above a whisper, as he led the officers towards the nursery. Each step up the carpeted stairs felt like a mile, the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on him. As they reached the second floor, Amelia's soothing voice drifted from the nursery. "Shh, it's okay, sweetie. Mommy's here." Andrew's heart clenched at the word mommy. He paused at the nursery door, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. The scene that greeted them was deceptively peaceful. Amelia stood by the crib, gently rocking Louisa in her arms. Lucia was arranging stuffed animals on a shelf, her back to the door. For a moment, it was a perfect tableau of domestic tranquility. Then Amelia looked up. The color drained from her face as she saw Andrew and the officers. Her arms tightened instinctively around Louisa, who began to cry louder. "Andrew?" Amelia's voice quavered. "What's going on? Why are there police officers here?" Lucia spun around, her eyes widening in shock and fear. "Andrew, dear, what is this about?" One of the officers stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Mrs. Collins, we're here to investigate a report of a missing child. We have reason to believe that the baby in your care may not be your biological child." Amelia's face contorted with a mix of emotions: fear, anger, desperation. "What? That's ridiculous. Louisa is our daughter. Andrew, tell them!" Andrew felt as if he were watching the scene unfold from outside his body. His voice sounded distant to his own ears as he spoke. "Amelia, please, just tell the truth." As if on cue, Clara Mitchell, the homeless woman, appeared in the doorway, escorted by another officer. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but there was a glimmer of hope in them as she caught sight of Louisa. "That's her," Clara said, her voice breaking. "That's my baby." The room erupted into chaos. Amelia clutched Louisa tighter, backing away from Clara. Lucia moved to stand between them, her voice rising in protest. The officers tried to maintain order, their voices adding to the cacophony. Andrew watched as Clara explained how Lucia had approached her on the street, offering money to be a surrogate. How she had agreed out of desperation, not fully understanding what she was getting into. How she had regretted her decision but felt trapped by the money she had already spent to pay off debts. As Clara spoke, Andrew could see the fight draining out of Amelia. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Andrew, her voice barely audible over Louisa's cries. "We just wanted a family. After all those years of trying, all those failed treatments, this was our only chance." Lucia chimed in, her voice pleading. "Andrew, darling, we were only thinking of you. We knew how much you wanted a child, how devastated you were by the infertility diagnosis. We thought this would make everything right." The weight of their confessions hung heavy in the air. Andrew felt a maelstrom of emotions: anger at the betrayal, sorrow for the pain they must have gone through, guilt for not being there, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the family he thought he had. "I want someone to tell me what exactly happened," Andrew demanded. "Mr. Collins," the detective began, "Ms. Mitchell here has agreed to give us her full statement. We thought it might be beneficial for you to hear it as well." Andrew nodded numbly, unable to form words. Clara sat down across from him, her hands fidgeting nervously on the table. I'm so sorry," Clara began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen." She went on to explain how Lucia had approached her on the street 2 months into her pregnancy. "Your mother saw me with my cardboard sign explaining my situation. She offered me money to be a surrogate for her son and daughter-in-law. I was desperate. I had debts, people threatening me. I thought it was a blessing." Clara's voice broke as she continued. "But as the months went on, as I felt the baby growing inside me, I knew I couldn't go through with it. But I'd already used the money to pay off my late husband's debts. I didn't know what to do." The detective interjected. "Ms. Mitchell, can you tell us about the day you gave birth?" Clara nodded, wiping away a tear. "I called Mrs. Collins when my labor started. They picked me up and took me to the hospital, but through a side entrance. A nurse, your sister, I think, and a doctor were waiting. They took me to a private room on the top floor." Andrew's heart sank further as he heard how deeply Sarah was involved. Clara continued, describing how she was lightly sedated during the delivery to keep her calm and compliant. After the birth, she was quickly discharged with some medication and an envelope of money, told to keep quiet about the baby. "But I couldn't," Clara said, her eyes meeting Andrew's. "She was my daughter. I couldn't just forget her." The detective turned to Andrew. "Mr. Collins, I know this is difficult, but we need to know. Did you have any knowledge of this arrangement?" Andrew shook his head, his voice hoarse as he spoke. "No. I was away on business for the past 6 months. I had no idea. I thought the baby was ours." As Clara finished her statement, the detective explained the potential legal consequences. "This is a complicated case," he said. "There will be serious charges for all parties involved." As the officers began to explain the legal process that would follow, Andrew's phone rang. It was the hospital. With a sinking feeling, he answered. "Mr. Collins, this is Dr. Gerald, head of board of Memorial Hospital. We need you to come in immediately. There's been a situation involving your sister, Nurse Sarah Collins." Andrew closed his eyes, feeling the last pieces of his world crumbling around him. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll be there soon." As he ended the call, Andrew looked around the nursery. The room that was supposed to be filled with joy and new beginnings now felt cold and hollow. The officers exchanged glances, then one of them spoke up. "Ladies, I'm afraid you'll need to come with us to the station to give your statements." Louisa, no, Clara's baby, was being gently taken by a child protective services worker. Amelia screamed in anguish, while Lucia stood shell-shocked, watching as her carefully constructed plan fell apart. Andrew knew that the road ahead would be long and painful. There would be legal consequences, broken relationships, and a lot of healing to be done. But as he watched Clara's face light up as she was reunited with her baby, he knew that despite the personal cost, he had made the right choice. With a heavy heart, Andrew prepared to leave for the hospital, knowing that the unraveling of this deception was far from over. As he stepped out of the nursery, he took one last look at the scene behind him. A poignant reminder of how quickly dreams can turn into nightmares and how the pursuit of happiness can sometimes lead us down the darkest of paths. The drive to the hospital was a blur of city lights and muted sounds. Andrew sat in the back of a police cruiser, his mind reeling from the events that had unfolded in his home. The officer driving occasionally glanced at him in the rear-view mirror, but mercifully remained silent, allowing Andrew to grapple with his tumultuous thoughts. As they pulled up to the hospital, Andrew felt a sense of déjà vu. It seemed like a lifetime ago that he had stood in this very spot, eagerly anticipating meeting his newborn daughter. Now he was here to confront yet another layer of deception. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed softly as Andrew was led to a small conference room. His footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway, each step bringing him closer to yet another revelation in this unfolding nightmare. As he entered the room, he was surprised to see not only his sister, Sarah Collins, but also the doctor he recognized from yesterday. The name tag on his white uniform was Dr. Ethan Barnes. Detective Ramirez and Clara took their seat at the table. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed, her usually immaculate nurse's uniform slightly rumpled. She looked up as Andrew entered, her face a mixture of shame and relief. Dr. Barnes sat beside her, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions visible in the lines of his face. Detective Ramirez cleared her throat. "Mr. Collins, thank you for coming. Dr. Barnes and Nurse Collins have agreed to give their full statements alongside Ms. Mitchell. It seems there have been some developments." Andrew took a seat, his eyes moving from face to face, trying to comprehend the scene before him. Clara sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a newfound strength in her posture. Sarah spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Andrew, I'm so sorry, I can't keep this secret anymore." She took a deep breath, glancing at Clara before continuing. "Last night, as I was walking home from my shift, Clara approached me. She recognized me from the hospital and she begged me to tell her where her baby was." Andrew's mind flashed back to the conversation he had overheard between Sarah and Dr. Barnes. Suddenly, it all made sense. Sarah's voice trembled as she recounted the encounter. Seeing her there, so desperate and heartbroken, I couldn't lie to her face. I told her everything, about Mom's plan, about how we had helped with the delivery and the paperwork. I realized then how wrong it all was. Dr. Barnes picked up the narrative. "Sarah called me immediately after. We spent the night discussing what to do. We knew we had to come clean, to make this right somehow." Clara spoke up, her voice stronger than Andrew had ever heard it. "They told me they would help me get my baby back. That's when I decided to go to the news agency and the police." Detective Ramirez nodded. "Ms. Mitchell came to us early this morning, along with Dr. Barnes and Nurse Collins. They've been cooperating fully, providing us with all the details of the arrangement." Andrew listened in stunned silence as they laid out the full extent of the deception. Sarah described how Lucia had first approached her with the idea, playing on her desire to help her brother have the family he always wanted. Dr. Barnes admitted to falsifying medical records and assisting with the clandestine delivery. "We sedated Clara lightly during the birth," Dr. Barnes confessed, shame evident in his voice, "just enough to keep her calm and compliant. I told myself it was for her own good, but I knew it was wrong." Sarah's voice broke as she continued. "After the delivery, we rushed Clara out of the hospital. I gave her some medication and an envelope of money. We told her to keep quiet, that it was better for everyone this way, but seeing her last night, hearing her pain, I couldn't live with myself anymore." As the full story unfolded, Andrew felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger at the betrayal, sorrow for Clara's suffering, and a glimmer of pride for his sister's eventual courage to come forward. Detective Ramirez outlined the potential legal consequences. Sarah and Dr. Barnes would face charges, but their cooperation would be taken into consideration. There was talk of plea deals, of reduced sentences in exchange for testimony against Lucia and Amelia. Throughout it all, Andrew found his gaze drawn to Clara. Despite everything she had endured, there was a quiet strength about her now. She had fought for her child, had refused to be silenced, and in doing so, had set in motion the unraveling of this entire deception. As the meeting concluded, Andrew felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. The truth, as painful as it was finally coming to light. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be trials, both literal and figurative, to face. But as he looked at Sarah, seeing the relief in her eyes at having unburdened herself of this secret, he felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps, he thought, from the ashes of these lies, something honest and good could still emerge. It would take time, forgiveness, and a great deal of healing, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Andrew allowed himself to believe that there might be a way forward through the darkness. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Andrew made his way out, his mind reeling from the revelations of the past hour. The weight of truth hung heavy on his shoulders, but there was also a strange sense of relief. As he pushed through the main doors, the cool evening air hit his face, grounding him in the present moment. Detective Ramirez gestured to one of the doors. "Your wife is in here, Mr. Collins. Are you ready to speak with her?" Andrew nodded, steeling himself before entering the room. The sight that greeted him was jarring. Amelia sat at the table, her posture rigid, eyes red-rimmed but blazing with a mix of anger and defiance. Gone was the vulnerable woman he thought he knew. "Amelia," Andrew began, his voice hoarse. She cut him off, her words sharp and bitter. "They took her from me, Andrew. They took my baby." Andrew felt a chill run down his spine at the possessiveness in her voice. "Amelia, she wasn't our baby, you know that." Amelia's face contorted with rage and jealousy. "She was mine. I carried her. I cared for her. That homeless woman doesn't deserve her." "How could you do this?" Andrew asked, struggling to comprehend the person sitting before him. "Why go to such lengths?" Amelia laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "You want to know why? Fine, I never loved you, Andrew. You were always just a means to an end." The words hit Andrew like a physical blow. Amelia continued, her voice cold and calculated. "I married you for your money, for the security. But you were always so cautious with your wealth. A child was my insurance policy. Even after we divorced, which I had already planned to do, I would get additional child support from you." Andrew sat in stunned silence as Amelia's true nature revealed itself. The woman he thought he knew, the life they had built together, it had all been a carefully constructed lie. "You're an infertile loser who will never have children of your own," Amelia spat, her words dripping with venom. "I did what I had to do to secure my future." As the full weight of Amelia's betrayal sank in, Andrew felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain was there, sharp and raw, but alongside it was a sense of liberation. The scales had fallen from his eyes, and he saw Amelia for who she truly was. "I'm sorry you felt you had to live such a lie, Amelia," Andrew said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "But what you've done is unforgivable, not just to me, but to Clara and her child." Amelia's face twisted into a sneer. "Save your pity, I don't need it. That baby was mine, and I'll find a way to get her back." As Andrew stood to leave, he took one last look at the woman he had once vowed to spend his life with. "No, you won't. I'll make sure of that." Leaving the room, Andrew felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at Amelia's deception, sadness for the years wasted, and a grim determination to protect Clara and her child from any further harm. Next, he was led to the room where his mother, Lucia, was being held. The woman who had raised him, who had always been a pillar of strength in his life, now looked old and defeated. But as he entered, he saw a flash of the steel that had driven her to orchestrate this entire scheme. "Andrew, darling," Lucia began, her voice steady despite her disheveled appearance, "you have to understand. Everything I did for you." Andrew felt a surge of anger. "No, Mom, you did this for yourself. You couldn't bear the thought of not having a grandchild, of your son being infertile. You put your desires above everything else, above the law, above ethics, above an innocent woman and her child." Lucia's facade cracked slightly. "I just wanted you to be happy, to have the family you always wanted." "And now look where we are," Andrew replied, his voice tight with emotion. "Our family is destroyed. Sarah's career is ruined. Amelia and I, there's no coming back from this." As he spoke with his mother, Andrew realized the full extent of her manipulation. How she had played on everyone's vulnerabilities. Amelia's desperation for a child, Sarah's desire to help her brother, even Clara's financial troubles. It was a web of deceit that had ensnared them all. When he finally left the interview room, Andrew felt drained. Detective Ramirez was waiting for him, her face sympathetic but professional. "Mr. Collins, we'll need you to give a formal statement as well. But first, The mother of the child wants to speak with you." She led him to a small waiting area where he found Clara sitting with her baby, her real baby, in her arms. The sight of them together, the obvious bond between mother and child, brought tears to Andrew's eyes. Clara looked up as he approached, a mix of gratitude and apprehension on her face. "Mr. Collins, Andrew, I wanted to thank you for believing me, for helping to uncover the truth." Andrew sat down beside her, his eyes drawn to the peaceful face of the sleeping infant. "I'm so sorry for what my family put you through, Clara. No one should have to endure that." Clara nodded, gently rocking her daughter. "It was terrible, but I have her back now. That's what matters most." "What will you do now?" he asked softly. Clara looked down at her baby, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm not sure, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a future to look forward to." Andrew nodded, feeling a resolve settle over him. "I meant what I said before. I want to help you and your daughter build that future. It's the least I can do to try and make amends for what my family has done." As they continued to talk, making tentative plans for Clara's new start, Andrew realized that from the ashes of his old life, something new and potentially beautiful was emerging. It wasn't the family he had imagined, but it was real, honest, and born out of a desire to right a terrible wrong. Andrew approached. "Detective Ramirez, do you have a moment? I'd like to discuss the potential legal consequences of this situation." The detective nodded, her face a mask of professional composure. "Of course, Detective. How bad is it?" The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Andrew sat in a small waiting area, steeling himself for what he was about to hear. The events of the day had left him emotionally drained, yet he knew there were still more difficult moments to come. The detective took a seat across from him, her voice low and measured. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Collins. The charges are serious. Based on our initial assessment, here's what we're looking at." She paused, ensuring she had Andrew's full attention before continuing. "Your wife, Amelia Collins, is likely to face charges of fraud and conspiracy to commit identity theft. Given the severity of these crimes, she could be looking at up to 15 years in prison." Andrew felt a chill run down his spine as the detective continued. "Your mother, Lucia Collins, as the primary orchestrator of this scheme, may be charged with aiding and abetting identity theft and fraud. She could face up to 10 years in prison. As for your sister, Sarah Collins, and Dr. Ethan Barnes," Detective Ramirez's tone softened slightly, "their cooperation has been taken into account. They'll likely be charged with forgery of medical documents and conspiracy to commit fraud. We're looking at a potential sentence, a few years of community service, revocation of their medical licenses, and/or probation." Andrew nodded slowly, trying to process the information. "And what happens now?" "Your wife and mother are being taken to the booking area as we speak," the detective explained. "They'll be formally charged and held until a bail hearing can be arranged. As for Sarah and Dr. Barnes, they've already surrendered their medical licenses. They'll be released pending the court's decision." She leaned forward, her voice taking on a note of caution. "I should mention, Mr. Collins, that these are just estimates based on similar cases. The final charges and sentences will ultimately be decided by the court." As if on cue, Andrew saw Amelia and Lucia being led down the corridor towards the booking area. Amelia's eyes were red and puffy, but there was still a defiant set to her jaw. Lucia, on the other hand, looked utterly defeated, her usual poise shattered. For a moment, Amelia's eyes met Andrew's. There was no love there, no remorse, only anger and blame. Andrew turned away, unable to reconcile this woman with the person he thought he had married. Sarah and Dr. Barnes emerged from another room, both looking shell-shocked. Sarah caught sight of Andrew and made a move as if to approach him, but seemed to think better of it, her shoulders slumping in resignation. Detective Ramirez stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Collins. There will be more questions in the coming days as we build our case. I suggest you get some rest and consider seeking legal counsel for yourself, even though you're not being charged. This situation could have implications for your company." Andrew nodded, feeling the weight of the detective's words. As he prepared to leave the station, he caught sight of Clara overheard a conversation between her and a Child Protective Services worker. "Ms. Mitchell," the CPS worker was saying, her voice gentle but firm, "given your current living situation, we think it would be best if we took the baby back to the hospital for now, just until we can find a suitable arrangement for you both." Clara's face crumpled, her arms tightening protectively around her daughter. "Please, no, I can't be separated from her again. I'll figure something out, I promise." Andrew felt a surge of empathy, remembering his earlier promise to help. Without hesitation, he approached them. "Excuse me," he interjected, addressing the CPS worker. "That won't be necessary. Clara and the baby will be under my care." Both women looked at him in surprise, Clara's eyes filled with hope and gratitude. "Mr. Collins," the CPS worker began, "while that's very generous, we need to ensure—" Andrew cut her off politely but firmly. "I understand your concerns. Clara and her daughter can stay at my home tonight. We have a fully prepared nursery with everything the baby needs. Starting tomorrow, I'll help Clara find and set up an apartment of her own." The CPS worker hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Collins, we'll need to follow up and ensure everything is in order, but given the circumstances, this seems like a reasonable solution for tonight." Turning to Clara, Andrew spoke softly. "If that's okay with you, of course. I know it's been a long day and you both need rest." Clara nodded, tears of relief spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As they prepared to leave, Detective Ramirez approached. "Mr. Collins, given the high-profile nature of this case, I'd like to arrange an escort for you and Ms. Mitchell." As they exited the police station, flanked by 2 officers, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the beginning and end of this day. This morning, he had arrived believing he was bringing his wife and newborn daughter home. Now he was leaving with a woman he barely knew, and her baby, bound together by an extraordinary set of circumstances. The drive to Andrew's home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they pulled up to the house, Andrew felt a pang of sadness, remembering his shattered dreams of family life. But as he helped Clara and her daughter out of the car, he realized that while this wasn't the family he had imagined, it was an opportunity to do something genuinely good. "Let's get you both settled," he said, leading them towards the house. "Tomorrow we'll figure out the next steps." As they entered the home, Andrew knew that this was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey. But for now he had kept his promise. Clara and her baby were safe, and he had taken the first step towards making amends for his family's actions. It wasn't much, but it was a start.